Hello and welcome to this session, the fifth lesson of the Germany course on 1923, the crisis year. Okay, so as always, prepare yourself for a little quiz. Just to recap the last session, pause the screen, answer the questions, and then when you're ready, we'll go through the answers. Okay. Right, question 1, the answer is the Spartacist uprising and the Cap Putsch. Which rebellion was left wing would be the Spartacist uprising, and then the Cap Putsch would be the right wing rebellion. The leaders of each rebellion were Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, and for the Cap Putsch would be Wolfgang Kapp. The rebellions took place in January 1919, January 6th, the Spartacist uprising, and then the Cap Putsch just over a year after that in 1920. What did Ebert do to deal with the Communist rebellion? He brought in 250,000 Freikorps to help put down the rebellion. To deal with the right-wing rebellion, he asked the Berliners to go on strike. He shut down all the services like the electricity, gas, water, transport to bring the city to a standstill, and it worked, and Kapp was arrested just 4 days later. Lucky, remember, that the Berliners actually did what Ebert asked. Number 8, what happened to Erzberger? He's the one who signed the armistice, giving them the title of the November Criminals because it was signed on the 11th of November. And Rathenow, well, they were assassinated. Number 9, why could Ebert not use the army to deal with this right-wing rebellion, the Cap Putsch? Well, that's because the army had been reduced to 100,000 by the time of the Cap Putsch at Versailles, about 6 or 7 months earlier. And of course, remember that the army does not fire on army. Reichswehr does not fire on Reichswehr, so they wouldn't follow Ebert's commands anyway. And lastly, what was the cause of the Cap Putsch, the right-wing rebellion? You could have had anything from Ebert using and then disbanding the Freikorps. They obviously really upset about that. They felt used after they just successfully put down the Spartacist uprising. They were angry following the Treaty of Versailles. Dolchstoss was still playing a part, that stabbed in the back idea, and the fear of communism. Okay, so hopefully you did well with that, and as always, if you need to go over some of them, start the video again, or make some flashcards ready for the ones that you struggled on. Okay, so let's go into this year of crisis, 1923. That's quite an appropriate image of Ebert. He's had quite a stressful time so far. So we are now 4 years since World War I finished. We've had the Spartacist uprising, we've had the assassinations, we've had the Treaty of Versailles, we've had the Cap Putsch. It's been pretty tough. So let's see what 1923 brings us. It is another very, very bad year for the Weimar Republic. So we're going to try and evaluate the key events of 1923 and consider their importance, particularly setting up the context for the rise of the Nazis later on. Okay, so this source sets us up for the first mini topic of this session, really, the French occupation of the Ruhr. That means the French have effectively, they've taken over the Ruhr. So the Ruhr is the industrial heartland of Germany, where all of the industrial output is 80% of Germany's steel is produced in the Ruhr. It's a very valuable place. So we got to consider to ourselves, why have the French invaded in January 1923? So before we go on, when you pause this video and have a little think to yourself, why would the French invade the Ruhr, which is in Germany? Okay, I'll leave the picture there just to give you a bit of a clue. You can maybe look at it and see what you think. But there is a reason why the French have done this. Okay, what do they rely on, or what has been agreed in recent years that should be happening? Okay, so before we look at some of the facts about this, let's consider this source, this image. So we can see a huge woman, quite aggressive looking. She's got big eyes. She's holding a gun. You may not be able to see a rifle, and you can see it, to the right hand corner of this source. She has got her hands in this area. It looks industrial. There's chimneys. There's factories. There's things going on there. So this giant French woman, this woman represents France, has got her hands on the Ruhr, and the source reads "hands off the Ruhr." Okay, so you can see that in German at the bottom as well. So France are in; they're in the Ruhr, this valuable part of Germany that's full of resources, steel and coal and everything, and the French have gone in. Have you any ideas why then? So the main reason really is that the French want some money. Clearly, there's a reason why, and that is simply because Germany have failed to pay one of the reparation payments. Remember that 6.6 billion pounds that they had to pay from the Treaty of Versailles? They failed. So they missed the payment in December. So in January 1923, the French have gone in and said, okay then, well, we'll take the value of that missed payment from the Ruhr. And that is effectively how this year has started. Okay, so Germany was bankrupt, remember, following Versailles and World War One. The coal fields were given to France as part of the reparations payment or deal. I'd say it was a deal. It wasn't a deal, was it? It was dictated. But the Germans lost their coal fields as well. They couldn't afford to pay the £6.6 billion, so they missed this payment in December 1922. As we've said, the French and the Belgian troops, they invaded. They entered the Ruhr, 60,000 of them, intent on taking what they believed was owed to them. Now, whichever way you look at it, legally, this is right. There was reparations. It was signed by Ebert back in 1919 at the Treaty of Versailles. They owe them this money every month. But the fact of the matter is the Germans just couldn't afford to pay it, so the French have invaded. Okay, so that starting 1923 is not a good start for Ebert. Just when he probably thought he had a little bit of stability, because not an awful lot's happened in the last 2 years since the cap putsch. So what are you going to do about it? Stop this video, pause it, just have a little think. If you're Ebert, what do you do about the French invading the Ruhr? I don't want to sort of lead you too far forward. Do you fight back? Do you get your 100,000 soldiers? What do you do? Okay, pause the video, have a little think to yourself, maybe make some notes to yourself, and we'll see how accurate or right you were, and then we'll move on. Okay, so before we do that, let's just have a little think to ourselves in full sentences, just to recap, either in your notes, if you're doing the Cornell notes, or in your book. Answer full sentences. Why did the French soldiers enter the Ruhr, and what did they intend to do when they were there? Just as a little summary, really, a little recap of the last bit of the story. Okay, so pause, answer, and then we'll move on. Right, so hopefully you had some ideas about what Ebert did. So let's see this source and see if it helps us understand a little bit what Ebert did do. Pause the video, have a look at it, come up with some ideas yourself before we talk about it, and then we'll discuss some of the obvious things, and hopefully you've picked up some of them as well. Hopefully by now you're getting pretty good at picking out messages within a source. Okay, so interpreting this source, let's see. The first thing that jumps out to me is the word nein at the top. Okay, so that means no. This German is saying no. So if we look at this German, he's the character in the middle, the worker. He's clearly got worker's clothes on. It looks sort of like he might mine, or he's in that industrial sort of labour type role with his flat cap. He looks a little bit sad. He looks a little bit confused, maybe angry. His hands are in his pockets. And he's got a pickaxe on the floor. So that's the first clue as to what Ebert did. Okay, so what Ebert has effectively told this worker to do is down tools, to put his tools down. Okay, we can see that in this source where the pickaxe is on the floor, the worker's hands are in his pockets, and he's saying no to the French and Belgian troops. They've got their guns, their bayonets, and they're shouting at him to get back to work. So the first thing to consider here is that Ebert, his decision to deal with this French invasion was to tell his workers to go on strike, to say no. Okay, so Ebert told the German workers to strike and to do it in a passive resistance way, just like Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement in America. The resistance would be passive, not aggressive. The Germans are clearly unhappy with the French, and angry towards the Weimar Republic for not resisting the French. But what can Ebert do? He's got no army. He really is in a bit of a tricky situation here. He's got to try and deal with this without resorting to the army, because it will effectively probably spark another war or another massive conflict. And then let's be honest, Germany is in no position to fight anymore. And that's the reason why this has happened, because they couldn't afford to pay the 6.6 billion. As we've said, they've only got 100,000 soldiers anyway, so that's not going to help at all. against these French troops, they could just bring in more. And the occupation of the Ruhr further crippled Germany even more. So 80% of its coal, iron and steel reserves has been effectively now taken control of by the French. So if they were already bankrupt and they were already struggling and they already couldn't cope, they've now lost 80% of its coal, iron and steel reserves, making the situation even worse. As a result, the debts increased, unemployment rose, and a crippling shortage led to inflation. So inflation is when the price of things goes up. Okay, we often have inflation. It's a sort of natural part of the economy, really. Every couple of years, things go up a little bit in price, but we generally get paid a little bit more as well. So, for example, I don't know, a Mars bar maybe 10 years ago might have cost 30 pence. Today it's 65 pence, but we all get paid a little bit more. So that's inflation, where the price goes up, and that generally happens when the supply is lower than the demand. So there's less goods going around. That means the price goes up. Okay, so inflation. This is important as we come into the second half of 1923. So Ebert told these workers to go on strike, and they have. So just to begin, and another little recap, really, a sort of comprehension exercise. How did the Weimar government tell the people of the Ruhr to react? So in full sentences, maybe one or two sentences, how did the government tell them to react? What did Ebert tell them? And what impact do you think that's had on Germany, particularly when you think about the economy? Okay, so if you have about 4 minutes or so for this task, pause the video while you do it, and then we'll move on. Okay, hopefully you've managed to do that and summarize the story so far. So this photograph is a fantastic photograph. It captures a real moment, a standoff. You look at this German with his coat and his pipe, and you look at these French and Belgian troops. It's an aggressive stance from the soldier. He's got his bayonet up. It really does sort of symbolise that source that we've just looked at, doesn't it? But this is real. This is a photograph, and he's standing there in the Ruhr, absolutely calmly, quietly, passive resistance, whilst this French soldier is telling him to get back to work, because the French, there's no point in the French being there if nothing's being made, because there's no value to steal or to take the payment of. So really, perhaps you could say it was a bit of a clever move by Ebert in the hope that it would make the French just go, well, we'll go home, there's no point being here. The issue is, as you've just written, the impact on the economy. 80% of Germany's economy, coal, steel, and that's led to this inflation. So it really might be a case of who is going to blink first, and maybe that's what Ebert was hoping, and then it would be the French would just go home first, they'd pay their compensation, and everyone would move on. Okay, unfortunately, that does not happen. So this photograph is just a unique insight into the invasion of the Ruhr, to give you a bit of a context and a standoff. Okay, so as this happens then, we've talked about the problems arising from Ebert's strike actions. The workers did not want to go on strike. Now, this is really important. People go on strike when they want to try and get better wages or working conditions, or they want to try and make governments improve something. It might be education, health, whatever it might be. You might get doctors going on strike, or teachers. Okay, and if a teacher or a doctor chooses to go on strike, it's important that you understand this. They don't get paid because it's been their choice to go on strike. In this case, though, it was Ebert that told the workers to go on strike. So he has to keep paying their wages because they've got families at home. Although they're struggling, obviously economically, Germany's bankrupt, but people still need to take a wage home and feed their kids and their families. So Ebert has to pay the wages of the workers. This thing can't go on for long. And how he does that, we'll see shortly. So nothing's being produced in the Ruhr, so there is no money to pay them. Inflation goes up because there are less goods. Remember, the less goods there are, the higher price you pay for them because there are less of them. This all leads to Ebert with another problem. He's got to make another decision. Maybe if Ebert was around at a different time, things would have been different for him. But he's had to deal with some seriously significant issues. So this choice for Ebert now is, what does he do? There is no money. There's no goods being sold, so there's no money even being made. Okay, so that's what he does. He prints money to keep paying the workers, adding to the debts, and inflation suddenly becomes hyperinflation. All right, and this is a serious problem. Okay, so the first problem of 1923 was the French occupation of the Ruhr. Hopefully, you're happy with the reasons why the French invaded, and you are happy with the actions that Ebert took. So they all link on. Everything is a chain of events in this story, in this session, particularly building up to the end of 1923, where Hitler decides to try and take over this government. Just to move on to the second problem of 1923. So let's just go look at this on the screen for the minute, and we see that at 0 minutes, a cost of a pen and chocolates is 12 marks, 12 Deutschmarks. Okay, so after 1 minute, and we'll literally think about it as this in minutes, that pen and chocolate suddenly becomes 134,000 Deutschmarks. After 2 minutes, that same chocolate bar and pen is worth over 250,000 Deutschmarks. After 3 minutes, 403,000 marks. 4 minutes, over 500,000 marks for the same chocolates and a pen. After 5 minutes, 672,000 marks. 6 minutes, 7 minutes, 8 minutes, you can see, and they were in the millions. After 12 minutes, 13 minutes, 14, 15 minutes, 2 million marks for a pen and chocolates. This is hyperinflation. So this is not just inflation where the price has gone up. This is hyperinflation. So if we keep going for 3 or 4 more minutes, 5 minutes, by 20 minutes after you've queued in the shop for this pen and this chocolate, it's gone from 12 marks to 2.6 million marks. And that might sound ridiculous. It really is hard to get our head around what this was happening. Now, obviously, people don't have 2.5 million marks, okay? Or in English, you wouldn't have £2 million for a pen and a chocolate bar, would you? But that's what's happened to the price. So it effectively means nobody can buy a pen or chocolates anymore. So this is what hyperinflation is. When the inflation is out of control, prices increase rapidly as the currency begins to lose its value. Now remember, Ebert's been printing money to pay the workers, which has made the currency lose value because you can't just print money, because otherwise everyone would do it. It does lead to inflation, and it's gone terribly wrong for Ebert. And this is all because the French invaded the Ruhr and Ebert had to tell them to go on strike and then pay them. It usually happens when there's a massive increase in the supply of money out of nowhere. So an extraordinary amount of money is put into the economy, and as we know, that's because Ebert printed the money. So this is a crazy sort of looking anecdote of the hyperinflation. 0 to 20 minutes and the pen's gone from 12 to 2.6 million. That's not the end of hyperinflation as a crisis, as I'm sure you can imagine. Most people can live without a pen and some chocolates. People need to buy food and bread and eggs and things like that. So this is where it becomes more of an issue. Okay, so this image that I'd like you to just think about in that inference question again. Remember question 1 on paper 3. What can you infer from a source? So just pause this video, have a look at this photograph, and make an inference or two about what it is you can infer or read between the lines of this image. Those blocks are blocks of money. Now, as cool as that might be, if you think about having a load of 5s and 10s or £20 notes in bundles like that to play with, that's the inference. So pause the video and then we'll have a little think about what you might be able to infer from this photograph. Okay, so quite an interesting photograph. The main inference I think we have to find from this really is that this money is worthless. It's worthless because kids are playing with money. They're building blocks, they're building towers out of money. But they're just playing with it because it's just like paper. It's worthless. So hopefully that's the inference that you've picked up. Okay, so let's see how this thing develops. This image or this source you can see is interesting but shocking. 1 loaf in 1913, 0.29. In 1923, the summer, that same loaf is 1,200 marks. And then by November, all right, 428 billion marks just for a loaf. 428 billion marks just for a loaf. All right, if you think about how much people pay on football players and things like that these days, 428 billion just for a loaf. 1 egg, it goes from 8 to 80 billion in just a few years. Butter, 270 up to 6,000 billion. A kilogram of beef, 5.6 thousand billion. And a pair of shoes, 32,000 billion by the winter of 1923. This is some crazy, crazy money. So I don't know, would you just write a check for your pair of shoes? Clearly, there is a problem. So what do you think the government are going to do about this little issue with? They see, in this photograph, you can see, similar to that earlier one, the children are playing with money. They're just building towers out of money. It looks like great fun. If only that money had some value. But clearly there is a lot of the money going around. Wads of it. That must be how they were getting paid. It is, just to give you a little bit of a hint of what's coming. They are paid in wheelbarrows of money to try and keep up. All right, count this shopkeeper counting out his wages for his workers. You can see just masses and masses of paper all over the place, and that's the money. All right, but this source is a little bit more serious. All right, so this woman, she's holding up her child. You can see the child is very skinny. You can see its ribs. It's clearly hungry, very, very, very skinny. The mum looks really skinny as well. She's got that gaunt look in her face. And all of those white bits of paper, they represent all this money. So they've got all this money, swimming, drowning in money, but yet they're starving and they're dying. And this is June 1923, as you can see in the corner. They're just wanting some bread. Bread, she's shouting. All this money, drowning in money, but yet can't buy a loaf. This is serious. People were really, really struggling with hyperinflation on top of everything else. Now, this doesn't affect just left wing or right wing. This affects everybody. So a really serious issue. The inference is the same as we've seen earlier, that there's all this money, but it's worthless to us all. There's nothing we can do about it, particularly when you think that an egg, is 8 billion marks. So here we go. This is what the government have done. So this is a 1 mark note. Okay. We then have the 2 mark note. Then we have a 5 mark note, funf mark. So a fiver, nothing too dramatic there. A 25 mark note. So a 25 mark note isn't that dramatic. We've got 20s. A 50 mark note in this note. So a 50 mark note, again, that's no different to us. We have £50 notes, don't we? Now it starts getting interesting. So now we've got ourselves a 1,000 mark note. 1,000 mark note. Imagine you went one Christmas morning, you come down and you have a £1,000 note. Okay, so you probably won't be able to spend it anywhere unless you bought something really expensive. But yeah, a 1,000 mark note. To try and keep up with this hyperinflation, they've printed 1,000 mark notes. 5,000 mark note. Okay, so you might have 20 of these in your wallet or your purse. 500,000 mark note, so 500,000 mark note, and you can see this is very plain now, isn't it? Just blue on white. 500,000 mark note, so you might have, I don't know, 20 of these in your purse or your wallet. That might allow you to buy, I don't know, an egg, a loaf if you can. There we go, 500,000 mark note. Here we are with the first million mark note. 1 million mark. A 1 million mark note. So if you have 10 of these, you have 10 million marks in your purse or your wallet. Sounds amazing, doesn't it? But remember, the cost of things is hyperinflation. It's out of control. 5 million mark note. A bit of paper that's worth 5 million marks. 10 million marks, and you can see the quality of the money is just getting plainer as this goes on. So this is in, if you look in the middle of the 10 million mark note, August 1923. So we're coming out of that summer period, aren't we? 20 million mark note. 50 million mark note. Still in August, but we are now producing notes worth 50 million marks. So if you have 10 of these in your wallet or your purse, you know, that's a hell of a lot of money to have in there, but you still can't buy anything with it. All right, 100 million marks. 100 million marks. September 1923 on this one. 250 million mark note. All right, so we can see there's some images on there, some representation of the fountain of youth or some healing thing where injured people are going in the pool and they're coming out healthy. I don't know. But the point is, 250 million mark note is what people are carrying around with them. And we've seen those children playing with their towers of money. Okay, 500 million mark note. It's just getting ridiculous now, isn't it? Well, if it didn't get ridiculous 5 minutes ago. 500 million mark note. Just one note worth 500 million. 100 million mark note. I think we're starting to get the idea. So this is October, the 22nd of October 1923. They keep having to print all this money, and it is absolutely not worth the paper it's written on. That's quite a famous saying. It's not worth the paper it's written on. You can't spend it. Okay, and then we carry on, we keep going up and up and up and up. So hyperinflation has run away with itself. You can't buy food, you can't spend your money. In actual fact, as we'll see from some of these photographs, it ends up in the streets. Just imagine you're walking home from school or anywhere and you see a load of £20 notes on the floor like that. I'm sure you'd be the first one to go over and start raking all that up and getting up. But people here are just looking at it because it's worthless. They've got bags of it enough at home. The kids are playing with it. They don't want any more. This is a really crazy picture. This shows a man getting paid. So he's gone in there with a wheelbarrow to pick up his wages. And who knows, they could all be 250 million marks in those packets. And the problem is, if he got his pay, they used to have to start paying the workers twice a day in order to try and get paid and get to the shop to spend the money to buy food before it went up even more. We saw at the start of this hyperinflation, minute by minute by minute, how much things went up. So the workers were getting paid twice, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, just so they could get paid and run to the shop. Because by the time that you'd been in a queue, perhaps, and you had, I don't know, 500 million marks with you, and you only wanted a loaf and some eggs, by the time you've queued in the queue, 2 or 3 minutes, it's become 1 billion. So you've lost out. So yeah, 3 or 4 times a day, people were getting paid in wheelbarrows to try and be able to go and spend it before it went out of control even more. This is an interesting image, wallpapering money on the wall, but they've clearly got a lot of money to paper on the walls. It means nothing, it's worthless. So instead of being able to spend this money, you see people in the villages and the farms and the towns, they started bartering. They started trying to trade goods for things. So people might offer to trade their bike for some eggs to a farmer, or whatever you can imagine happened. You've seen in that picture of that mum holding up her baby as they were drowning to death, that people were desperate, so they were willing to barter and trade to try and give to get food to feed their families. So here's where we are. All right, August 1923, Ebert has gone, and I feel like after everything we've done now so far, just for Ebert to just disappear like this, it seems a bit sad, a bit unfair. I think we've got to give him some credit that he did his absolute best in the 4 years since World War One. I think he dealt with everything, but this hyperinflation, it was his fault. He's the one who told the workers to go on strike, and he's the one who printed the money. You could argue that it was the French fault. They invaded and Germany had no choice. That's a whole argument for this, and you can argue with whatever you want. And once again, that's the great thing about what we do in history, is that your opinion is as valid as anybody else's. You just got to back it up. So this Stresemann character, we'll get to know Stresemann really well over the next couple of sessions. He takes over. But the damage to the Weimar Republic over the last 4 years, do we think he is going to be successful or good? So he's inherited a weak Weimar Republic. It's been rescued by the Freikorps. There's been strikes, hyperinflation. Thousands of Germans have been killed over the last 3 years. Assassinations, murders. Germans have suffered. All Germans have suffered, and most of them blame the Weimar Republic. That Dolchstoss, that stabbed in the back. They're pretty angry, and this 1923 so far has not helped. The Weimar Republic surely is close to being doomed. So the extreme parties, they have their own private armies. So by 1923, the Nazi Party are around. Each of these private armies are dangerous. They grow more and more hostile and more stronger every day. Okay, so the law courts, they do tend to turn a blind eye to right-wing violence. So this is what Stresemann has inherited, and we'll do Stresemann next session. But let's just see how this hyperinflation issue plays out. So on your notes, if you put a little subtitle of the effects of hyperinflation, or if you've got your book, do a little mind map of this as we go through it. There are going to be 4 boxes, 3 of which are negative, 1 arguably maybe positive, okay? So the first thing to think about is that the normal living became impossible. All right, everything's changed. Like we've sort of summarized already, people were paid in wheelbarrows, they were paid twice a day. You could add these notes in any way you want, word for word, just pause the screen and carry on and write and then carry on, or you could just listen. The shops began trading instead of taking money, and people raided the shops as they couldn't afford food. So crime goes up. It was just all round not good. So this was just normal living conditions, living in Germany during hyperinflation. Then we think about the people with savings. So the people with savings, they've got money in the bank. They've worked really hard all their life. They've saved up. Now all that money they've been saving for a house, a car, a holiday, well, it's worthless. It's absolutely worthless. So they're really angry. They're the middle class people, people who are a bit well off, who had some money. They were doing well in life. Overnight they've lost it all. Pensioners on a fixed pension. Now, I'll try and explain this to you a little bit, just to try and make it as simple as possible. You can have your pension, and it can be a fixed rate pension, which means you get £200 a week, every week, or until you die. At least that way you know what you're going to get, so you can budget. You know, you need that much for your rent, you need that much for food, that much for the bingo, or whatever it is you do, but at least you know that you get £200 a week, and that's what you get. So you can take a fixed pension, or you can get a variable pension, which the pension, if it's variable, goes up and down depending on what the interest rates for the country are, or the bank of each country. So you might get more or you might get less if you have a variable pension. So most people took a fixed pension because at least they knew where they stood. They knew how much they were going to be earning every month, so they could spend it accordingly. Now, if you have taken that £200 a week fixed pension and an egg is 8 billion marks, well, your £200 a week is not going to go far, is it? Because you're still going to get 200 marks or £200, but the egg is 8 billion. So hopefully you get the idea about why people who had a fixed pension, they suffered incredibly. And remember, they're old if they're on a pension. And the middle classes, they are extremely affected. They're really angry as well. So the middle classes, they're going to be looking for some way out of this. And it will be important that the middle classes, they do tend to support the Nazi Party as things develop. The ones with money, they start giving the Nazi Party money and helping them, and it's because they're angry. They've lost everything, and the middle classes, they haven't forgotten the war, they haven't forgotten anything that's happened so far with this new Weimar Republic, and they certainly won't be forgetting hyperinflation anytime soon. Okay, but as well as that, everybody's suffering. The German marks are worthless, so you can't even trade with other countries. So we're not even getting things in to Germany from other countries that we might be able to help. We might be able to import vegetables or anything from Holland or France or Britain, but we can't because they can't spend their money because they have no money. So foreign suppliers refuse to accept the German mark, and food just got worse. The shortages of food just got worse because they couldn't grow it, they couldn't import it, they couldn't sell it, they couldn't buy it. If you were a farmer, I guess, you were probably a little bit better off because you could make your own food, but that might set you up for a little bit of crime. So these 3 areas, they've gone red to symbolize, hopefully, obviously, these are negative effects of hyperinflation, bad things that happen. Now, if you're in your exam and this is a 12 marker, the essay where you're explaining why or explaining the impact of hyperinflation, then these would be your facts. These are your key facts or evidence that you might include in your paragraphs. But there are some positives of hyperinflation. People with loans and mortgages, well, they benefited because if you had a loan and you had a 20,000 mark loan, well, with one note, you could go into the bank of 500 million marks and pay off your loan and say, keep the change. And the bank would have to accept that because you effectively had a loan of £20,000 or marks. Same as a mortgage. You had your mortgage, you had £150,000 left on your house. You've got a note here of £500 million. One note, in you go, pay off your mortgage. So some people did benefit. So although you might benefit individually, it certainly has not helped the economy at all. So some people start to hoard goods and they sell them for huge profits. As prices go up, they start selling these things for a hell of a lot more money than they're worth. But people pay it because they're desperate. Foreigners coming to Germany, they really did benefit because their own currency was so much stronger, so they could buy more in Germany. Doesn't help the German people, but it certainly helps foreign people. So this would be an example, I suppose, loosely, of a positive of hyperinflation. Overall, it is a complete and utter disaster. All right, so the last task to do really with this session is you can do this on paper or on your computer if you've got PowerPoint or whatever. I think it would be useful for you to break down the events from the armistice to hyperinflation in this order. So you'll see it sort of goes around like a backwards S. Linking the boxes to each other. Try and add some facts and some information about the armistice, the setting up of the Weimar Republic, the Spartakists, Versailles and Cap Putsch as a summary, as a revision exercise. Try and do it off memory, perhaps in one colour first, and then if you need to, look back through your notes, your revision guides, or on the website, and add some more detailed notes to it, just so you can see the journey or the cause and consequence of this bit of the story. So how have we got from the armistice and ending the war in November 1918? How have we found ourselves now at hyperinflation, and what's happened since? Okay, so quite a serious crisis year for the Weimar Republic. We've introduced Stresemann as the new leader. We'll do a lot more about Stresemann, and we have seen off Ebert. Really, we must consider that this was Ebert's his fault. Okay, but whether or not he had the choice or not is up to you to decide. So hopefully this session's been quite useful in showing you how crazy 1923 started and then developed and got worse. 1923 does not end well either. We have Hitler, who attempts to take over Munich in the Munich Putsch. Okay, so a huge thing. And Hitler basically at this point of hyperinflation, coming to November, the end of the year, he thinks this Weimar Republic is on its knees, it's finished. All it will take is a very, very small rebellion and they'll take over this country because it's broken. And I can understand, I think, why he might have felt that. But that's another story, a couple of sessions or lessons later. Just to keep the idea that Hitler is going to take this opportunity to attack the Weimar Republic when it's on the ropes, if you like. Okay, so remembering, as always, these lessons, PowerPoints, and everything else is on stchistory.com. Find the session or the section that you're looking for, and on social media as well, and then there's videos on the YouTube channel. Okay, thank you very much. See you soon.